Hello, this is Cate Stillman on the Yogahealer podcast. And I had a question come up on the Yoga Health Coaching Forum, and it was around like, how do I work from home? And another one, I'm like, how do I work from home with kids? And I've been working from home since, I have a little bit of experience here. I've been working from home since I started in 1996. Telecommuting from a job that I had in Washington, D.C. when I moved out to the Idaho-Wyoming border to be a ski bum, and they let me take my work. And so I learned a lot early on. That was in my early 20s. So most of my adult life, I've worked from home, or I've had a home-based office and worked from home and in other places. And I've been working exclusively from home, I don't know, for at least a decade, I'd say. So I have a few tips. I've written a few books that deal with body and schedule and time and place and how to be the best you, how to be a master of you. So I have a few things to share. And what I thought would be most helpful is the perspective that Steven Pressfield gave us with his book called Turning Pro. And he says, to feel ambition and to act upon it is to embrace the unique calling of our souls. Not to act upon that ambition is to turn our backs on ourselves and on the reason for our existence. Turning pro is like kicking a drug habit or stopping drinking. It's a decision to which we must recommit every day. So I agree wholeheartedly. I love that book too. Steven Pressfield's a genius. The point here is that there's a decision on an identity. So you have to decide who you want to become next. My book, Master of You, goes into this to the nth degree, and there's chapters on it in the early on of like, once you decide who you want to be next, how does that person work? How does that person get ready for work? How does that person dress for work? What's the environment that person works in? And you have to make decisions on that. You have to turn pro. You have to become a professional at being that identity. And that's always an adjustment. It's a continued adjustment. As soon as you realize who you want to be, you're not that yet. Who you want to be, what you want to have, what you want to do in terms of your work, how you want to show up, what skills, what relationships, assets, tools, all of that, right? That is continually something that is what you're striving to be. And that's how it works. Like, that's what it's like to turn pro, is you realize that you're continually wanting to get better, right? So some of the first tips that I have on how to work from home like a pro is to get very clear in your identity evolution. There's a free worksheet on this at masterofyou.us/workbook. And you can get the workbook and do the identity evolution worksheet. And you can just ask yourself, as I'm recording this podcast, like, what are you wanting to become? Like, who is that person? And really particularly, like, how do they work? How do they work? What's their home environment like in terms of their work environment? What kind of interruptions does this person tolerate? So you're objectifying a future self. You're making that future self that you want to become and how that person works, you're making that into an object so that you can start to find the corners of it. Find, like, when you're building a puzzle, you start with finding the edges of the puzzle, finding the corners of it, right? So you can know what it is. So what does this person look like when they go to work? What do they wear? What do they do with their hair? Do they wear jewelry? Do they wear makeup? Like, what do they like? They're pro. So how are they appearing? What's their office environment like? What are the qualities of it? Is it day lit? Is it, do they look good on camera in their office? What kind of plants are in there? Are there books in there or not in there? What is the environment like? Is it neat? Is it cluttered? Like, what is the environment that this person, this future identity, really thrives in? So we know from a lot of the work in the integral community, we know that structure precedes evolution. So in the integral enlightenment community or the evolutionaries community, we know that there's a lot of attention paid to structure once there's the understanding that structure precedes evolution. So how you work, including the kind of output that you have, the kind of results that happen from your work, there's a structure that preceded that. There's a structure, whether it's an enlightened structure right now or an unenlightened structure right now. So whenever I look at like any issues I'm having, and I'll just use an example, say my kid is walking into the office whenever they want. There's a structure that's currently in place for her to do that. Now, if my kid knows that if there's a note on the door that she's not allowed in, or there's consequences for coming in when there's a note on the door, when it's not an absolute emergency, which it never is or almost never is, that there's a consequence from that, that's a different structure, right? There's different rules in place, and rules hold structure. So just asking yourself, okay, future identity, like what kind of work environment do you have, including how do you tolerate interruptions? What is the structure needed around your protected space, quiet space, et cetera? And what you might quickly come upon is like the structures that you want, you don't know how to do that. Like you don't know how to get that because maybe you've got 2 kids under the age of 5 and you're the primary caretaker and you need to work from home. So how are you going to do all that? And so it begets the question of like, what else is trying to happen here? So what I found often in that is like sometimes we need obviously like care from outside the home, and there's so many kids and teenagers right now who need little part-time jobs, et cetera, that might not be able to get a real job yet because they might be 12 or 13 or 14, but they can watch the kids for 2 hours at a time, et cetera, and you can have unstructured interruptions. So getting really creative with like, what structures does this person going to need, this future self-identity who's a pro at work? There's different structures that you can start to put into place. And just simply asking the question can help so much of who do I need to become next in order to turn pro. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I show up to work each day and some of my habits. And some of this comes out of Body Thrive, which is a book I wrote and also a course that I teach. Before I do, I'm going to drop another Stephen Pressfield quote from Turning Pro. He says, "When we're living as amateurs, we're running away from our calling, meaning our work, our destiny, the obligation to become our truest and highest selves." So in Turning Pro, Stephen creates, 2 distinct identities, the identity of the amateur and the identity of the professional. And when I first read that book, 10 years ago, it made an impact on me. It made an impact in such a way that I realized that the professional that I wanted to become in terms of impact and in terms of income wasn't the person who was showing up to work every day. And I had to get real with that. I had to get really real with like, who is the person that I'm becoming next? And we just talked about that. Now, how does this person get ready for work as if they were going into an office? Because that's what I started to do, is realize that how I prepared myself, what kind of peak performer I needed to be at work, I had to show up as that person every day. So habits like going to bed early, there's a habit that needs to happen if you're going to do that well, which is you have to go to bed with your stomach empty, not your small intestines empty, but your stomach empty. And it takes a little while for food after a real meal to exit your stomach. So giving yourself 3 hours between dinner and bed will ensure that when you go to bed, that you're more likely to get a good night's sleep. That'll ensure that you're more likely to wake up early. There's a great interview, I'll put a link in, with Dr. Huberman, who's a neuroscientist, and he has his own lab, and he's part of this Stanford collective, and they do a lot of different work on mind-body interaction chemistry, neurochemistry, and what he's discovered is that, and he's a colleague of Carol Dweck's. Many of you have read the book Mindset, which has everything to do with if you're in a growth mindset or a learner mindset versus a fixed mindset, which is often connected to a victim mindset. And to be in a learner mindset, it kind of means that you're learning along the way and taking some of the hits of that, like some of those first attempts in learning, which can be that you get a little bit bruised along the way, right? It's not always the easiest thing to do. So, with that, what he's proven now is that if you can basically release dopamine, and dopamine is a neurotransmitter that signals that like, hey, I can learn from experience and get better. And that it's a small reward system in the physiology that is much more elevated in life learners. And there's ways that you can do that by giving yourself small rewards. So if you've made an effort to appear at work in a certain way, that you've gone to bed early, that you woke up early, that you attuned yourself to the circadian rhythms, that you hydrated, eliminated, exercised, that you're wearing clothes like the professional that you want to be, hair, makeup, if you do those things, right? That you're going to work as a pro, and you stop and you pause and reflect that like, hey, I look good today. Hey, like I did it. I got to the office. My desk is clean and clear and I'm ready to rock. As soon as you recognize that self-recognition actually gives a boost to dopamine, which will actually improve your performance and your ability to hit obstacles head on that will appear throughout the day. So rather than running away from the hard stuff, you start to actually run towards the harder things. So what Stephen Pressfield says about that is each day the professional understands he will wake up facing the same demons, the same resistance, the same self-sabotage, the same tendencies to shadow activities and amateurism that he has always faced, right? So we don't expect things to get easier. We expect to be able to rise above it. And dopamine is really the key neurotransmitter that we want to stimulate through setting ourselves up for the right action. Pressfield goes on to say that our work is practice. 1 bad day is nothing to us. 10 bad days are nothing. And what he's saying there is like a pro is going to have to overcome adversity. Now, what Huberman says about adversity is that you actually want to use dopamine, which is this neurotransmitter in the brain, right? That actually can develop a positive relationship with adversity. So if you take the big challenge and you break it down into smaller things, like maybe it's a smaller thing for you to get to work on time and for you to design a schedule in the way that actually really works for your body and your lifestyle and all the other people involved. And that when you do that, when you take that huge challenge of like, how am I going to do that? And you break it down into small steps, like maybe I can work for a half an hour uninterrupted today, or maybe I can do a focus day every other day at work and really move projects forward in a massive manner. You take the bigger thing and you break it down into the smaller thing, and then you reward yourself when you do that. So that's another one of my tips on like how to work. It's just how to work in general, but how to work from home, how to turn pro on that is at the end of the day, schedule a little bit of time, or the end of your work session, schedule a little bit of time to celebrate your wins. So that might be a wins journal or a to-dones journal as rather a to-do, because most people actually overwhelm themselves. They put themselves in fight or flight by feeling like they're not accomplishing enough, by not accomplishing what they really want to do. And they're out of relationship with time, with the field of time. Now, this is something that you want to get really good at, is what is your relationship with the field of time? A lot of people, when they shift from the structures that are at work, that's outside of the home, to working in the home, realize they need to set up new structures. Without any structure, there's not much evolution that can happen, right? Structure precedes evolution. So what kind of structures do you need in the field of time is very, very important. And realizing that is something that I find really quite flexible, but that you want to set up. So I might set up like, hey, this is my working structure for the next month. These are my focus days. These are my buffer days, or when I'm doing a lot more meetings or other kinds of activities. These are my free days when I'm completely available either for myself or for other people. Sometimes those are part days of the week of like, okay, well, in this next month, it's going to look like this because of these reasons. But getting very, very clear on how you work best, what kind of structures you need to set up in order to work best, doing all the things that Nira Yal talks about in Undistractable, and you can go back and hear my interview with him, or Brian Solis talks about in Life Scale, and you can go back and hear my interview with him, which is basically all about like you need to turn off distractions. You need to sometimes work offline in order to move certain things forward. If you have meetings, you want to spend time preparing for the meeting and wrapping up from the meeting, and not just doing back-to-back meetings, which if you're not doing the follow-up actions will make you feel overwhelmed and will decrease your, the progressive nature of what you're meeting about going into implementation. So realize that you get to create better structures. And that's how you're going to work from home like a pro. And it's always going to come up. What is the next structure we need for this kind of work that I'm meant to do to evolve in the next phase of my life? Looking at those phases in shorter and shorter time periods. For those of you who are trying to work from home with kids, you might look at like testing a structure for a day. If it works that day, great. Can we test the structure now for the next week, or do we need to make some changes to that? And that structure would include everything from mealtime to bedtime to waking time to morning routine before work to how you're dressing for work to what the office looks like and how you go to work. Now, what happens when you start to work? What are the structures around your time then? What do you do first? What do you do second? What do you do third? And the more you can create a rhythm with that, the easier it's going to be. And this is what Stephen Pressfield's talking about in terms of turning pro, is you no longer look for excuses. You no longer let your ego fall into traps around who you used to be and why it's so hard and why you can't do this because there's this and that. And instead, you get very solutions oriented, even if the solution is just this is what we're going to do today, and we're going to see if this works. If this works, great. We're going to look at applying it for a week. Great. If it worked for a week, we're going to apply it for a month. If it works great for a month, okay, great. We're going to look at, do we need to tweak it, or can we apply it for the next quarter, and get in rhythm. And rhythm is the most basic teaching from Ayurveda. Universal laws, the first universal law really is that the law itself is rhythm. Rhythm is order. Order is rhythm. So you're just looking like, can I get myself into a rhythm to turn pro? Just in closing, I want to say that to me, my dad commuted growing up. He spent about 90 minutes in a car every day getting to work and back. I'm really thankful that he was never in a car accident. I'm really thankful that he was really willing to do that commute and he had a big responsibility job in a city, and we lived in the country. And I'm super thankful for that in his life. And he devoted his life to developing computer, first hardware, then software, and then managing software companies. And I'm so grateful that we have the technology, that people like him really, and people all over the place, like, really made it possible for us to be able to work from anywhere and make the kind of impact that we want to have and make the kind of income that we want to have. So turning pro, I take it very seriously. I remember my dad waking up and putting his suit on and getting in the car with his buddy and commuting. And I just look at it the same way. Like, I'm going to show up to work like a pro. I'm going to give every day my best at it. And I'm going to create the structures necessary to do that. And I'm going to make sure that those structures flex and flow with the needs of my family. I hope this has been helpful. Any feedback or tips, you can let us know at podcast@yogahealer.com. All right. And if you have a bigger dream that you want to manifest, you can do a dream session with us. Go to yogahealer.com/dream. And there's a lot of great benefits to doing a dream session. We have a lot of free resources and e-courses that can help you really particularly make the transitions that you're wanting to become the person you want to be next. And that's really what we're designed to do at Yoga Healer. All right. Namaste, and have a great time turning pro, working from home.